Hi, my name is Lynn Jung. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer pursuing traditional publishing, and today I have something very exciting to share with you guys. If you're new here, this is a channel where I share my writing journey and writing thoughts and bits about my writing. Traditional publishing is a very long and rocky road, and it's something that I'm really interested in talking about, unwrapping, sharing with you guys as much as I possibly can. And today we're going to talk about the query letter aspect of it. So most of you probably already know this if you're returning members to this channel, but this past July, so July 2024, I signed with my third literary agent. I've had two previously. I ended up leaving my literary agent before this one in 2022, and I took like 2023 off. Those dates might be wrong, but I took about a year off to focus on my dark academia adult fantasy project mods, get that ready for another round of querying. Fortunately, I was very successful in that. I signed with an amazing agent, but I understand that the querying process can be kind of opaque and intimidating for a lot of people diving into it for the first time. It was something that I found really intimidating when I first started out, but as someone who has done this a couple times now, I figured I would share my letter, talk a little bit about some tips and tricks I have for querying and how to put your best foot forward for yourself and your book. If you're interested in just like the nuts and bolts of my querying journey, so what I went through personally, there is a video that you can watch. It is part debriefer on how I got to where I got to and my project and my aims for querying, and also just literally a vlog where I filmed a clip every time something happened throughout the, I think, a couple weeks of querying and like talking to agents and that kind of thing. So today I'm going to be sharing my query letter and talking about some querying tips and tricks, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about what querying actually is and what the purpose of it is and why it's important to have a literary agent if you want to pursue traditional publishing, which is the avenue of publishing that you take when you, for example, want your books to have nationwide distribution, work with a publishing team, as opposed to self-publishing or indie publishing where you're handling a lot of those marketing and distribution aspects kind of on your own. The first step to traditional publishing, beyond just writing your book and revising it, is getting a literary agent. A literary agent is someone who submits your book to editors at publishing houses, and this is a process called submission, which I will talk about in another video. I've also gone on submission 3 times. A literary agent, though, is so much more than the person who makes those connections to editors and submits your book to them. They help you prepare a pitch for those editors. They help you navigate your contract, which is like the biggest chunk of their job, and they do all of this for a 15% commission. I guess commission would be the right word for it, but they take 15% of what you earn on your book. Literary agents are undeniably important, and there's also quite a limited number of really good, really qualified, experienced literary agents. Of course, there are also newer agents to the field who have just started to build up their career, and they should not be discounted at all. But, you know, good literary agents who can get the job done, who have that mentorship and support from their agencies, and who have those connections to editors, and who have that drive to get your book in front of them and have your book be seriously considered, those are kind of more uncommon than maybe we'd like them to be as writers. And so there is a process to actually signing with and working with a literary agent, and the first step of that is generally querying. So step 1, finish your novel. Polish it to a high shine, get beta reader feedback, get those revisions in, make your book the absolute best it can be before you send it out to agents. Once you've done that, you can construct a querying package. For fiction, this usually consists of a query letter, which is a 1-pager, more or less, has a synopsis of your book or a really brief kind of 2 or 3 paragraph pitch of your book, especially highlighting the key points that really make your book unique and really make it pop. You want to grab an agent's attention with your query letter. Some agents, and this is usually most of them at this point, I feel like, will also require a synopsis, which is separate from the query letter. It's usually 2 to 3 pages at most. I would say keep it at 2. This is a relatively detailed breakdown of your entire plot, including those main beats and the ending. So it is your entire book summed up in a couple pages. And I know that some people find synopses really frustrating to write, but one thing I will tell you is that if you're writing fiction, you're probably going to write a synopsis for every book you write moving forward, so it's a really good skill to practice now. And don't let an agent requiring a synopsis keep you away from submitting to that agent. But different agents do have different requirements, so it's a really good idea to check each individual agency or agent's guidelines before pulling any of this together. Just be sure you know exactly what they want, how many pages of sample material they require if they want a synopsis, all those good things. For this video, we are going to focus on the query letter. I could make a separate video about synopsis writing because it's actually something I genuinely enjoy, but have a hard time explaining fully. But let me know if you're interested in that as well, and I would be happy to pull that together. But I do want to focus on the query letter because, in my opinion, it is probably the most important part of your querying package. A lot of the times, this is going to be the first or only thing that an agent reads out of everything you submit to them. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I feel like it is the main part of the work. It explains you, it explains your book, it shows how marketable it is, how catchy it is, how easily it'll sell. And a good, strong query letter is the key to getting a full request or a partial request, which is when the agent requests either the full manuscript to read over or part of the manuscript to kind of gauge if they want to work with you. A query letter should be succinct, it should be compelling enough to get the agent to request pages, and it should demonstrate your book's strengths as well and give them an idea of what kinds of editors they want to pitch this to, where they could imagine positioning this in the market, all those good things. But accomplishing all of that in one page is a really big ask, and fortunately there are a bunch of resources online for querying authors. I'm going to give you some pointers here, but if you want someone to actually look over your query letter and tell you if you're on the right track, give you pointers, and generally just help you get ready to put that thing in front of agents, then I am very happy to introduce you to today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is actually a little bit of a special one because it's for a new service provided by one of my really good writing friends, Eunice Kim. I feel like I've literally mentioned her on this channel before because she has helped me so much throughout my writing journey, my traditional publishing journey, navigating all of these things. I feel like every other day, every other week, I'm in her Discord DMs being like, hey, I have a question about this actually, and she always has an answer. So I'm very pleased to announce that Eunice Kim's query critique services are now offering query critique services for authors at all ranges and stages of their writing journey. With nearly a decade of publishing experience under her belt, Eunice has reviewed thousands of query letters, including the query letter I'm about to share with you today for Project Moths, and it would not be in this form without her help. Eunice is also an agented author herself, just like me, so she's very uniquely positioned in this intersection of having actual publishing experience and having experience as an author who has queried herself to help other authors in that position. She can help give your letter that extra nudge it needs to stand out in the super competitive query trenches. And if you need a little bit more encouragement, you can check out her website for additional client testimonials. She's helped literally so many people with her sage advice and her critiques and her knowledge. Prospective clients are eligible for a 15% discount from this video. When you reach out to Eunice to get a query critique, just mention the code lynndjung, so lynndjung in all caps, to claim your discount. And in case you're not quite ready to share your query letter yet, this discount will be available for the next 6 months until July 5th, 2025 from the date that this video is posted. So you have plenty of time to get your query letter ready, finish your manuscript, emotionally prepare to query before you reach out to Eunice for her services. And you can learn more at her website, which I will link in the description box below. Thank you again to Eunice for sponsoring today's video. All right, before we dive into the query letter, I want to forward this with a really big caveat, which is that I don't know, like I've had agents before. That just tends to make querying a little bit easier. I also did have a referral for one of the agents that I queried, which ended up actually being the agent I signed with. So all of those things are like little tiny advantages that help you stand out just the smallest bit. I'm not going to say that I secured representation because of the referral or because I've had representation before. I believe I secured representation on the merit and strength of my manuscript, but I do think those helped my queries stand out a little bit more and helped me get responses a little bit faster. But at the end of the day, we're just talking about the letter here, and so I hope that regardless of my experience, these tips will help you develop your own query letter and get it ready to send out to agents. So yeah, let's go ahead and start. Just gonna read my letter out to you guys. Dear Agent, Project Moths is a dark academia adult fantasy complete at 90,000 words. It would fit comfortably on shelves alongside character-driven, literary-leaning dark academia fantasy in the vein of R.F. Kuang's Babel, as well as high-stakes contemporary fantasy such as Leigh Bardugo's Ninth House. Personalization here, in brackets. Major content warnings include discussions of grooming and on-page depictions of body horror, suicide, loss of bodily autonomy, and drug and alcohol abuse. On a rain-soaked night in modern-day Paris, ambitious alchemist Larkspur Lee and her academic rivals find themselves at the center of an impossible crime. The murder of their university's headmistress, the immortal professor, which is just a code name I'm using for now. In the aftermath of the professor's death, the school devolves into chaos. The mysterious investigator assigned to the case, Violaine, believes a cult is responsible for the professor's murder. Lark, once a cult initiate herself, will do anything to keep her past hidden and stay out of the cult's reach. Matters are complicated when the mentor she crossed an ocean and a continent to escape re-enters her life, enticing her to his side once again while secretly wielding an agenda of his own. As the cult's plans come to fruition, the university's dark history comes to light, and Lark is torn between her ambitions and her growing affection for Violaine. The two women have no choice but to set aside their suspicions and save one another when no one else will. I am a queer Korean American writer currently based in state. I was previously represented by previous agent who is no longer working as a literary agent, so I'm seeking new representation. My short fiction, which has appeared in Apparition Lit and the Icarus Writing Collective, has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize. I also run a writing-focused YouTube channel with an active and growing audience of around 18,000 subscribers. Project Moths is a new project that has never been on submission. I have included materials per your submission guidelines, and the full manuscript is available upon request. Thank you for your time and consideration, lynndjung. So, that was the letter. I redacted some things just because the reason that I don't say super specific things like the name of the cult, the name of the professor who died, the name of any of the characters other than Lark and Violaine is because, I don't know, I just want to keep details to myself in case stuff changes. I don't think that's the most amazing query letter ever. I think it is very solid. It went through a couple rounds of edits. I had a few people, actually including Eunice, look over the query letter and the synopsis before I sent it anywhere. So your goal, generally speaking, with a query letter is to get across the aspects of it, the elements of it that are the most catchy, as well as give this general overview of the story, the conflict, the stakes. That's something that I will say I've looked over a couple of query letters myself, and sometimes I feel like people who haven't looked over a lot of effective query letters, they'll just describe the world or the setting or the characters, and they won't get into the actual plot. It'll feel more like they're describing event A, event B, event C. Agents want to see the connective tissue between those events. They want to see the conflict. They want to see what is actually propelling that story forward. And sometimes this goes back to newer writers not having a well-defined conflict in their story. So if it's that, I would recommend revisiting the story. If it's not, try to make sure your conflict shines in your query letter, because at the end of the day, stories are conflict, right? But the other angle of that is that I wanted to include the parts of the story that are the most catchy. For Moths, it's all about that dark academia fantasy angle that has that academic commentary. There's the intrigue of an immortal being murdered right at the start of the story, and there's also the cult and Lark's history. From the beginning, I've been this book is really a book about Lark. It's about her and her history and her reckoning with her past and the cult that she was previously involved with, and that comes back into her life in the course of this book. That's a really big part of that, so I wanted to really emphasize those elements. The strength of my comps, I think, is also, or was, helpful. I have a whole video on comparative titles. Looking back, I do think Babel and Ninth House were slightly too popular, and Babel isn't a super effective comp for this book. Ninth House is a lot closer to what it actually is. But I did have several other comp titles kind of in play, and I would rotate them based on what the agent's wish list said, so the comp titles were kind of personalized as well. And Babel and Ninth House just happened to be the ones that I chose for my agent. Also, my bio section, it's short. I think the main things I wanted to mention were that I had previous representation and that I've published a little bit of short fiction, although I don't think, the Pushcart Prize isn't that big of a deal, really, because I think 100,000 people get nominated every year, but it's still a cool little notch in my belt. I'm looking at the paper copy of, literally I just printed out the email that I sent to my agent. In it, I do also mention my YouTube channel because it is writing focused and I do feel like it's relevant, but in this I say I have 16,000 subscribers. So I think in the course of the time I was querying, which was not very long, I gained subscribers, which is kind of wild. I also mentioned the state I live in, which I didn't share with you guys, but I live in the Midwest right now because time zones are kind of important for scheduling phone calls. Most publishing is centered around EST because so much of publishing is concentrated in New York. So in my case, because I'm in CDT, I have to accommodate for Eastern time, and I don't mind it at all. It's just an hour off. But if I were on the West Coast still, back in California, I'd probably be can we push this meeting to not 6 a.m. for me. So that was the letter. That was my breakdown of it. Again, not the most phenomenal letter ever. I think it was very serviceable, and I think also that my opening pages kind of helped me get the number of offers that I did end up getting. So now let's dive into some querying tips and strategies that I used. So number one is understand the identity of your book. I think that this is super crucial just as a writer as well as someone who is trying to get their foot through the door in traditional publishing. Like understanding your pitch, having a good, strong one-liner elevator pitch is super important. All of that boils down to knowing your book's identity. I have a clear vision for mods. I think that is part of the reason why querying went well for me this time around. I understood how it slotted into the market. I had my reservations about that as well because dark academia is kind of hitting a saturation point, but you know. I also specifically sought out agents who I thought would respond well to my vision for this book. The number of agents I queried was really small, relatively speaking. I queried 16 agents in total, but I still ended up getting a 60% request rate. So I was very particular. I looked at manuscript wish lists, which you can look up with an agent's name at any time, what they previously represented, who were their top authors, and I tried to figure out if their ideas for like voice and tone as well lined up with mine. I was also particular because I would consider myself someone who writes more literary leaning spec fic, so not heavily on the side of commercial genre fiction. And I wanted to find an agent who would respect that and enjoy that and respond to that rather than pushing me in a more commercial or a more literary direction. I like kind of towing that line. So that was also me having a vision for the kinds of things I want to write in the future. And like, I guess my career, I don't know. But all of those things played into my selection and how I pitched my book. Number two, develop strong comparative titles or comp titles. If you can. I know this is not the case for every book because I've had the situation where I could not find comp titles for a book. I'm having it for Crips. But if you can have like a pool of comp titles and good, strong, relevant comp titles, so not all of them can be super popular blockbuster hits, make sure you have like 3 to 4 at least books that performed well in the market that people will like know, but not a massive franchise, like for example Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, and also have been published in the last like 5 years is best. Make sure that your comp titles are in the same genre/age category. There were some comp titles that were on the line for me because they were dark academia fantasy, but they were young adult. And Mods is very firmly adult, and I just didn't want to send any mixed signals about that. So I didn't use any YA books for any of my comps. I've seen some people have success comping with movies and TV shows, but in that case you should have two. You should have one that is your movie or TV show that is a really excellent tonal, plot-wise, character-wise comp, and you should also have your regular book comp relevant from the last 5 years. And you know your book best, so you will probably know which comps are weaker and which ones are stronger. For example, for Mods, a really weak comp would be like Harry Potter because it is for a younger audience, it's too old, they don't have anything in common other than the magical school element, which is a big element, but they're just not, it's not enough, it's not close enough. But Ninth House is a stronger comp because it has the contemporary setting, it has a complicated female protagonist, it's newer, it's adult, again, takes place in the real world, which not a lot of dark academia fantasy necessarily does. And so for me, that was the comp I ended up using the most because it was the closest match, and that comp I felt would set up appropriate expectations for what my book was like. Also for comps, being specific is really good. Specificity is key. It's good to mention what elements of that comp title specifically pertain to your work. I think I said high stakes contemporary fantasy. I could have even said like high stakes dark academia contemporary fantasy, character focused, but then I ended up using literary leaning dark academia fantasy to describe Babel, so I didn't bring up dark academia a second time with Ninth House. But keep this pretty brief, like a couple of words just to describe what elements of that comp title really best fit your book. Again, it's all about setting up those expectations and making that agent feel like, oh yeah, I loved Babel. I'm so excited to read a book that is similar to it, but different and unique and fresh. Also, another thing to mention here is that you shouldn't lie. Like, if your comp claims something really specific, like, here, let me read my example. The Great British Bake Off meets the cozy rivals to lovers romance of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. And then the book ends up being like nothing like either of those. Like maybe there's a little bit of a baking competition, maybe there's a little bit of enemies to lovers romance, but it's like, I don't know, not similar at all. Then that's just like disappointing. You know, you as an agent go into a manuscript that you requested being like, this is going to be a super cute cozy fantasy about a baking competition with magic and like enemies to lovers and fairies maybe, and it's just nothing like that. That's kind of grounds to reject. Sorry, there's a grape in my mouth. Also, can someone please write that book? Tip number 3 is to build your list of agents beforehand. Find agents by looking up who represents the authors you love, who wrote your comp titles, who has been putting out a lot of debuts in your category, and genre. Great way to do this is to crack open your favorite relatively recent reads in your category and genre and just see in the acknowledgements who is the author thanking, who represented them. You can also look up agents using the website querytracker, but this one, it's kind of hard to really specialize. Like if you go, okay, give me agents who represent fantasy, you're gonna end up with a list of like 600 people. I find that a little bit untenable, and I like to be a little more focused in my querying efforts, but that's always a resource you can use. For my part, I mostly ended up looking at the pages of entire agencies that I knew were reputable, so I've kind of been in the game long enough to get a sense of like who is good at being an agent, or what agencies have been around a little bit longer and have good mentorship and support their authors really well. So then I would look at the agency, I would look at their team, figure out which agents represented adult fantasy, and then figured out which ones would be like the best fit. And I also recognize that like being kind of in these traditional publishing author circles online for a relatively long time has given me a leg up in that way, but there are a lot of ways to find agents that might be a good fit. Number 4, be selective with your agents. Figure out, have they been selling consistently to like good markets? By which I mean like the major independent publishers, big 5. Do they sell consistently, or are they selling like once every couple years? Do they sell consistently in your genre and age category? Have authors who signed with them for their debut stuck around? Sometimes you might be interested in a newer agent who doesn't have many clients or sales, maybe just started out this year or the year before. I would say like give them a shot for sure. But you want to make sure that the agency backing them is strong. Like you want to make sure that they are working alongside other agents who have that record, who have that experience, who can help them and introduce them to new editor connections. The reality of this business is that agents need to have strong connections with editors and publishing houses to sell your book. Yes, there's only so many agents. There's even less editors, and agents kind of have to have good relationships with various editors and imprints and publishing houses in order to get your manuscript prioritized. And there's a lot of turnover in this industry, so there's new and up-and-coming agents coming in all the time. Same with editors. You don't necessarily need to go with the most established agent with like a 25+ year long career, but when looking for a good fit, you want to find someone who can do what you want to do. Do you want to work with an agent who has access to resources that aren't other agents, such as like foreign rights people? I guess that would also be agents. In-house editors are a thing at some agencies. Do you want those connections as well? You need to look at more than just the agent who loved your work. You need to consider both the agent as an individual person and also the community that they have, because this business is really tough and a lot of agents leave and you don't want to be left high and dry. Also, I've mentioned the manuscript wishlist page for agents, and I will mention it again because it's a really good resource. And it'll just be a list of everything they like and are looking for and want to read. This is also a great resource to help you personalize query letters as well, and I use that a lot for this. A lot of the agents I queried specifically were looking for lush prose, grounded fantasy, dark academia, or they said that they loved Babel or Ninth House or any of my other comp titles. And so I queried those people, and I mentioned what they liked and what they would find in my book in the query letter. Okay, number 5, query in small batches. This doesn't work for everyone. It worked for me. It's kind of like a way to test and see if your query letter is effective. And the way to do that is to see how many requests you end up getting. So I sent out my first little small batch of query letters. I got good request returns. I sent out a slightly larger batch, and yeah, it worked. Number 6, if they are a good fit. If you've done all your due diligence and you're like, I would feel very comfortable signing with this agent, I like what they're doing, I like their client list, I want to work with them, I like their agency as well, then look for agents with a quick turnaround time. You can figure this out by going on querytracker and looking at the comments of an agent's page, and people will literally post like, here's the date that I sent out the query letter, here's the date they got back to me. If it's something like under a week, that's a really fast turnaround time. I would say query those agents first and prioritize your queries to them, by which I mean, again, you want to make sure these are agents you would be happy working with. My agent is a very fast responder. I am thrilled to be working with her. I did not just query her just to see if my query was working, right? But query these agents first or early on, and then you'll get a faster turnaround time and a faster response to see if your query letter is actually working. If you get a rejection, rejections are still valuable. If you're getting pretty consistent form rejections on a query letter, it might be worth revisiting that query letter and seeing maybe if you can tinker with the pitch. Maybe it's not highlighting the best elements of your book. Maybe it's time to get someone to look over your letter and see what they feel about it. Number 7, don't take anything personally and don't give up. I stand by my very firm belief that will never change, that resilience is the key to surviving in this industry, especially as a writer, but just like in general as an agent or editor. There are other complications in terms of like finances and stuff, like that has definitely been a big barrier for me personally, but my resilience in the face of things like, okay, I flopped on submission twice, I had to leave 2 agents, or, you know, my first agent left me, but that was because of like other circumstances that were happening. It was the pandemic. Like if I had just pulled the cord and given up in those moments, I wouldn't be where I am right now. And I do think that it has taught me that even if, yes, I've taken breaks, I've prioritized other elements of my life, but I will always come back to writing, and I will always keep trying to get to that next step of publishing. So this is my message to all of you querying writers out there. If you are getting a lot of rejections on your query letters, on your full manuscripts, on your partials, don't give up. There's always going to be the next book that you can write. You have more stories in you. There's always the opportunity to maybe get an R&R, or, you know, brush up your query letter, brush up your materials, change the identity of your book in some way to make it actually fit and grab those agents. There's always something you can do. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons that I've stayed in this game as long as I have. You are not helpless. You are not helpless to the whims of agents and editors and the industry and the bestseller lists or whatever and TikTok book people. You can always write the next thing and keep going. And I think that empowerment has been super helpful for me. Even though writing is hard and like the money aspect of it is not ideal at all. I completely understand that. But you can always write the next thing and keep pushing. It is a lot to ask of people to like work and pour in so much of their time and energy and love for free. But it's also, again, if it is something that you want to do, you can do it. And I believe that 100%. So yeah. Okay, tip number 8 after that little rant is to understand what you want out of your career. So this means think about your dream career as an author. Do you want to publish 2 books a year and make a really consistent income? Or do you kind of just want to like see where publishing takes you? That's kind of where I'm at right now. Different agents, I think, offer different strengths and weaknesses, and this is purely a vibe check. There's no website you can look at that's like, here's what each agent can accomplish for you. But I think this is a very important conversation to keep in mind and to have with agents when you get to that call stage. I do also have a video about questions to ask on the call, and I get more in depth in like what career-oriented questions you can ask during the call with agents. Focusing on just the one book and getting an agent for just the one book and being like, I will take whoever I can get, is a little bit of a disservice to writers. So think about that broader career, think about where you want your next steps to be, and be open to having that conversation and being like, hey, this is what I want. Do you think we can work on this together? And that is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Drop a little like sun. No, it's snowing outside. Maybe a snowflake emoji in the comments below if you made it to the end. Let me know if you're querying or getting ready to start querying or where you're at with your journey. I'm always interested in hearing from you guys. And Happy New Year. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.